Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In the previous lecture, we have learned about the physiological anatomy of the upper and the lower respiratory tract. Moreover, we talked about the functions of the upper and the lower respiratory tract. Today, we are going to talk about the blood supply of the lungs and the nerve supply of the lungs. We are going to talk about the pleura, the pleural pressure and its variations during respiration. We are going to talk about pneumothorax, which is a pathological condition, and we are going to talk about the alveolar and the transpulmonary pressures along with their significance. So first topic is blood vessels of the lungs. There are two types of blood vessels present in the lungs: pulmonary vessels and bronchial vessels. First, we are going to talk about the pulmonary vessels. Now, pulmonary vessels constitute the pulmonary circulation. You can see the pulmonary vessels in this diagram. This is the right atrium. The right atrium receives the deoxygenated blood through the superior and the inferior vena cava from entire body. The blood from the right atrium goes to the right ventricle, and right ventricle pumps this blood into the pulmonary artery. Now, pulmonary artery, it arises from the right ventricle and about 5 centimeter beyond the apex of the heart. It divides into two branches, the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. Each branch of the pulmonary artery enters the respective lung. So, left pulmonary artery will enter the left lung, and the right pulmonary artery is going to enter into the right lung. On entering the lung, each pulmonary artery is going to divide into branches. In the same way, the bronchi branch within the lungs. Now, this pulmonary artery brings deoxygenated blood to the lungs. This blood is oxygenated when it passes through the pulmonary capillaries. The oxygenated blood is carried back to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins. So after oxygenation, the blood is carried from the lungs back to the heart through the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins drain or take this oxygenated blood to the left atrium. From the left atrium, this blood goes to the left ventricle, and left ventricle pumps this blood into the aorta, and from aorta or through aorta, this blood is distributed to the entire body. Now this constitutes the pulmonary circulation, and purpose of the pulmonary circulation is to oxygenate the blood. Now, lung also receive the nutritive supply through bronchial arteries. Bronchial arteries are the branches of aorta. This is the diagram showing you the origin of the bronchial arteries. So, this large vessel is aorta. This is the descending part of the aorta. So, bronchial arteries are the branches of descending aorta. They carry the oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood to the lung parenchyma. The blood flow through the bronchial arteries is about 2% of the cardiac output. The purpose of this blood is to take the oxygen-rich blood to the lung tissue. Now, bronchial veins carry the deoxygenated blood. Now, bronchial veins carry this deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary veins, and these pulmonary veins then go to the left side of the heart as we just discussed. So, although the bronchial veins carry the deoxygenated blood, it is drained into the pulmonary veins and to the left side of the heart instead of to the right side of the heart. Now this blood in the bronchial veins constitute the physiological shunt, that is the mixing of the deoxygenated blood with the oxygenated blood in the pulmonary veins. It is about normal physiological shunt is about 2%, which is equal to the amount of blood flowing through the bronchial circulation. Now talking about the nerve supply of the lungs. The lungs are supplied by both divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Now, autonomic nervous system has two divisions. You all must be knowing that it has a sympathetic division and a parasympathetic division. There are two types of receptors present in the lungs for mediating the actions of the autonomic nervous system, the muscarinic receptors as well as the adrenergic receptors. I am repeating this point, that to mediate the effects of autonomic nervous system, there are two types of receptors present in the bronchial tree, the muscarinic receptors and the adrenergic receptors. The parasympathetic effects are mediated through the muscarinic receptors, and acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter which is secreted here. Again, I am repeating that parasympathetic effects are mediated through the muscarinic receptors, where acetylcholine acts as a neurotransmitter. Now, adrenergic receptors present in the bronchial tree are beta 2 adrenergic receptors. Although alpha 1 receptors are also present in the lungs, but there is a preponderance of beta 2 adrenergic receptors, and sympathetic effects are produced through stimulation of beta 2 adrenergic receptors. Stimulation of the sympathetic fibers produces bronchodilation, and this effect is mediated by the adrenergic receptors. While the stimulation of parasympathetic nerves produce bronchoconstriction, and these effects are mediated through the muscarinic receptors. Now, sympathetic stimulation, in addition to producing the bronchodilation, also cause increase in bronchial secretion. Now, sensory receptors are also present in the lungs. These are non-encapsulated sensory end organs which are present in the walls of trachea and bronchi, but these receptors are not present in the alveoli. So, I am repeating again that sensory receptors are present in the lung, mainly in the trachea and the bronchi. These are non-encapsulated sensory end organs which are stimulated by stretch. These receptors are involved in lung inflation and deflation reflexes. So this was about the nerve supply of the lungs. Now we will move on to the next topic, which is pleura. Now pleura is a membrane, seroelastic in nature. It lines the thoracic cavity and it is invaginated by the growing lungs. I am repeating that pleura is a seroelastic membrane which lines the inner surface of the thoracic cavity and it is invaginated by the growing lungs. The pleural membrane has two layers, the visceral layer or visceral pleura and the parietal layer or the parietal pleura. Visceral pleura lines the outer surface of the lungs, while parietal pleura lines the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. Between the two layers of the pleura is present a potential space which is known as pleural space or the pleural cavity. It is a closed space which does not contain air. It contains a few ml of fluid which is the lymph. It is secreted by the parietal pleura and it is drained by the lymphatics. The pleural fluid enables the lungs to slide on the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. There is another point to remember, that the parietal pleura has the pain fibers and therefore it is sensitive to pain, while visceral pleura, which lines the outer surface of the lungs, it is insensitive to pain. Now this diagram shows how the lungs invaginate the pleural membranes. Now consider it that this is the lung and this is the pleural membrane. So lungs invaginate the pleural membranes, resulting in the formation of two layers. One is the lining the outer surface of the lungs and the other lining the inner surface of the thoracic cavity, and in between the two there is a space which is known as pleural sac or the pleural cavity. So this is it, showing you the two lungs and the two layers of the pleural membranes. Now we just discussed that the layer of the pleura lining the outer surface of the lung is the visceral pleura. So this is the layer of visceral pleura, and the layer of the pleura lining the inner surface of the thoracic cavity is the parietal pleura. So this is the layer of parietal pleura, and in between the two is the space which is the pleural sac or the pleural cavity, and it is filled with intrapleural fluid which is actually the lymph. Now we will talk about the pleural pressure. Now we were talking about the pleural space, that it is the space present between the two layers of pleura. Now this pleural space, it shows a pressure which is known as pleural pressure, sometimes also called as intrapleural pressure or the intrathoracic pressure. The pressure which is exhibited by this space is slightly negative, or in other words we can say that it is subatmospheric, because this is not an absolute negative pressure. Instead, by negative pressure we mean that the pressure is slightly less than the atmospheric pressure. I am again repeating it, that the pleural space exhibits or shows a pressure called as pleural pressure. Now this pressure is a negative pressure, and by negative pressure we does not mean an absolute negative value. Instead, by negative pressure we mean that pressure in the pleural space is less than atmospheric pressure, or it is subatmospheric. This pressure shows changes during phases of respiration. There are two phases of respiration, that is inspiration and expiration. Now at the end of a normal expiration, or we can say at the beginning of an inspiration, the value of intrapleural pressure is -5 centimeter of water. During inspiration, it becomes more negative or more subatmospheric, and by the end of inspiration, it becomes minus 7.5 centimeters of water. During deep inspiration, it will become more subatmospheric. It can reach to low values as low as minus 30 millimeter of mercury. During forced expiration against closed glottis, the pressure can increase and can become positive to a value of 100 millimeter of mercury. During first breath, after the baby is born, again the intrapleural pressure decreases to very low or negative value to about minus 77 millimeter of mercury. Now the pressure in the lungs can be described in two units. Either they can be described in centimeters of water, or they can also be described in millimeter of mercury. As you can see, few points these are in centimeters of water, while at other points these are in millimeter of mercury. So these two units of the pressures are interconvertible, and 1 millimeter of mercury is equal to 1.3 centimeters of water. So you have to refer to the values which are given in Guyton. So in Guyton, during normal respiration, the values are given in centimeters of water, so you can quote these values. Now this is the graph showing us the pleural pressure and its variations during respiration. On x-axis, we have the phases of respiration, the two phases, inspiration and expiration. And on the y-axis, here we have the pressure changes given in centimeter of water. So lower curve is of the pleural pressure change. These dashed line shows the demarcation between the phases of respiration. So this is the beginning of inspiration. We just talked that at the beginning of inspiration, the pleural pressure is minus 5 centimeters of water. During inspiration, when the lungs are expanding, the pleural pressure becomes more negative or more subatmospheric. At the end of inspiration, it becomes minus 7.5 centimeters of water. Now during expiration, this change is going to reverse. So from here, expiration is beginning, and you can see during expiration the change is reversed, and the negativity of the pleural pressure is going to decrease, so that by the end of expiration it will become again minus 5 centimeters of water. So these are the changes in the pleural pressure during normal respiration. Now we will talk briefly about the expansion of the lungs after birth. In fetus, the lungs are non-functional. The lungs do not contain the air, and the breathing function is performed by the placenta. Immediately after the baby is born, the muscles of inspiration undergo strong contraction. The strong contraction of the muscles of inspiration is brought because of the respiratory signals generated in the brain stem. Now, due to strong contraction of the inspiratory muscles, the thoracic cavity expands outward. The expanding thoracic cavity pulls the parietal pleura along with it, because the parietal pleura It lines the inner surface of the thoracic cavity. So, as the thoracic cavity expands, parietal pleura is going to move along with it. Now, the outward movement of the parietal pleura will pull the visceral pleura as well as the lungs. Here the pleura is missing. So, outward movement of the parietal pleura, it pulls the visceral pleura and the lungs too, because this is these, although these are two layers, but in fact these are continuous. So when the parietal pleura moves outward because of the outward movement of the thoracic cavity, it is going to pull the visceral pleura along with it. And since the visceral pleura is lining the outer surface of the lungs, so it is going to pull it along with it. So as a result, the outward force is going to cause the expansion of the lungs. As the lung expands, the pressure inside the lungs decreases. You must know that there is an inverse relationship between the volume and the pressure. As the volume increases, the pressure decreases. So the lungs expand and the pressure inside the lungs decreases. It becomes less than the atmospheric pressure. So air will move into the lungs, which will constitute the baby's first breath. Once the baby takes the first breath, the lungs are expanded, and thereafter they will remain inflated, and the subsequent breaths will be easier. Now coming to the point why the intrapleural pressure is subatmospheric. In the last lecture, we talked about that lung is made, it contains the elastic tissue. The elastic tissue has a tendency to recoil when it is stretched. So, the elastic tissue in the inflated lungs, it has the tendency to recoil. Recoil inward or towards the mediastinum along with the visceral pleura. The chest wall, on the other hand, also has the recoiling tendency. But the recoiling tendency of the chest wall is in opposite direction. Opposite direction to the recoiling tendency of the lungs. Now, chest wall has a tendency to recoil outward. Again, I am repeating that the lung, being the elastic tissue, has the recoiling tendency, and the recoiling tendency of the lungs is inward towards the mediastinum. The recoiling tendency of the chest wall, on the other hand, is in outward direction, or we can say the chest wall has a tendency to expand. Now, this tendency of the lungs to recoil or retract and the tendency of the chest wall to recoil outward increases the pleural space. Now, the fluid which is present in the pleural space cannot expand to fill the space. So, a vacuum is created. Now, this vacuum causes the intrapleural pressure to become subatmospheric. Here, another point is of very important, that this fluid which is present in the pleural space, it is continuously drained by the lymphatics, and there is a suction force which is also present, which also contributes to the vacuum formation within the pleural space. So, if the lymphatics are blocked and this fluid is not drained into the lymphatics, it will collect in the pleural space and this will this collection of fluid in the pleural space will result in loss of the vacuum and the negativity of the pleural pressure. So there are two factors contributing to the negativity of the pleural pressure or its subatmospheric value. Opposite recoiling tendencies of the lung and the chest wall, and continuous drainage of the pleural fluid into the lymphatic channels. Now coming to the measurement of the intrapleural pressure. There are two ways by which the intrapleural pressure can be measured. One is the direct method and the other is indirect measurement of the intrapleural pressure. The intrapleural pressure can be measured directly by inserting a needle into the pleural space and connecting it with the manometer. However, it is measured indirectly from the lower third of the esophagus. The pressure in the lower one third of the esophagus represent the intrapleural pressure. So it is measured indirectly by measuring the pressure in the lower one third of the esophagus, and this pressure is equal to intrapleural pressure. Now, significance of the intrapleural pressure. Intrapleural pressure keeps the lungs inflated. As we just talked, that this subatmospheric pressure, it balances the recoiling tendency of the lungs. So if there is loss of this subatmospheric pressure, the lungs will be deflated or they will have a tendency to collapse. So one important function performed by the intrapleural pressure is that it keeps the lung inflated. Second, it acts as a respiratory pump for the venous return. Negativity of this intrapleural pressure, it causes the blood to be sucked from the lower lower part of the body into the upper part of the body. So it helps in the venous return. It is one of the factors that enhances the venous return to the right side of the heart. So this function is known as respiratory pump for the venous return. Now coming to the next topic, which is pneumothorax. Pneumothorax is an abnormal or the pathological condition. Just a few minutes ago, we have discussed that in a normal person, the pleural space does not contain air. It is a closed space and it only contains a few ml of pleural fluid. If the air it enters the thoracic cavity, here by thoracic cavity we mean the pleural space. So I am repeating that if the air enters the pleural cavity or the pleural space, this condition is known as pneumothorax. Pneumo means air, thorax means thoracic cavity or the pleural cavity. So presence of air in the pleural cavity is known as pneumothorax. It can be caused by the stab wound or it can be caused by the rupture of some part of the lung which causes the leakage of air into the pleural space. Now what happens if the air enters into the pleural space? Entry of the air into the pleural space results in the loss of negativity of the pleural pressure. When air enters into the pleural space, the intrapleural pressure becomes equal to the atmospheric pressure. So the force which prevents the recoiling tendency of the lungs is lost. It will result in collapse of the lungs, and collapse of the lungs will result in serious cardiopulmonary disturbances. Next topic is alveolar pressure. Alveolar pressure is the pressure of air inside the lung alveoli. It is also known as intraalveolar or intrapulmonary pressure, that is pressure within the lungs. The pleural pressure is the pressure within in the thoracic cavity, while alveolar pressure is the pressure within the lungs, that is inside the lung alveoli. So I am repeating again that alveolar pressure is the pressure of air inside the lung alveoli. It is also known as intrapulmonary pressure. If there is no air moving into or out of the lungs, the pressure in all parts of the respiratory tree all the way up to the alveoli is equal to the atmospheric pressure. Again, I am repeating that when there is no movement of air into and out of the lungs, the pressure in all parts of the respiratory tree is equal to the atmospheric pressure. During inspiration, the alveolar pressure decreases to -1 centimeter of water. How does it decreases to -1 centimeter of water? The reason is that during inspiration, the contraction of inspiratory muscles causes the thoracic cavity to move outward, which cause a further expansion of the lungs and increase in intrapulmonary volume. Increased volume of the lungs cause a decrease in the alveolar pressure. So pressure decreases to -1 centimeter of water. This causes a gradient to be formed between the atmosphere and the air present in the lung alveoli. So air will move from the atmosphere into the lungs, which is the process of inspiration. During expiration, the thoracic cavity it returns to its original position, so lungs are compressed. The volume of the lungs decreases and the pressure inside the alveoli increases. So it becomes +1 centimeter of water. Now during expiration, this pressure, that is the alveolar pressure, becomes greater than the atmospheric pressure. So this time the gradient is in the reverse direction. So the air will leave the lungs. It will move from the alveoli into the atmosphere. And this is the process of expiration. So significance of the alveolar pressure is that by changes it forms the gradients between the atmosphere and the air present in the lungs and results in inflow of the air into the lungs during inspiration and outflow of the air from the lungs into the atmosphere during expiration. During normal breathing, about 0.5 liter of air moves into the lungs during inspiration and the same amount of air leaves the lungs during expiration. Now again the same graph, but now we are going to concentrate on the alveolar pressure curve. On the x-axis, we have the phases of respiration, the inspiration and the expiration. And on the y-axis, we are having the change in the pressure. So at the beginning of inspiration, the alveolar pressure is 0. During inspiration, as the lungs expand, the alveolar pressure decreases to minus 1 centimeter of water, and this causes the air to move into the lungs. And how much air moves into the lungs during inspiration and quiet breathing? That is 0.5 liter of lung, sorry, 0.5 liter of air. And you can see from this curve. This curve shows the changes in the lung volume during quiet breathing or normal breathing. So lung volume increases by 0.5 liter during normal inspiration. So I am coming back to the alveolar pressure curve. At the beginning of the inspiration, the alveolar pressure is 0 centimeter of water. During inspiration, the lungs expand and the pressure decreases to minus 1 centimeter of water, which causes 0.5 liter of air to move into the lungs. Now, at the end of inspiration, the alveolar pressure again becomes 0 centimeter of water. And during expiration, when thoracic cavity returns to its original position, the lungs are compressed, the volume of the lungs decreases, and the pressure inside the lungs increases. And it increases to plus 1 centimeter of water, and this increase in the pressure, that is the alveolar pressure, causes the same amount of air to leave the lungs during process of expiration. And at the end of expiration, alveolar pressure will again become 0 centimeter of water. Now coming to another pressure, that is the transpulmonary pressure. Transpulmonary pressure is also known as transthoracic pressure or transmural pressure. Now trans means across something. Transpulmonary means across the lungs. The difference of pressure between the inside of the lungs and the outside of the lungs. Inside of the lungs we have the alveolar pressure, and outside the lungs we have the pleural pressure. So transpulmonary pressure is the pressure difference between the alveolar pressure and the pleural pressure. The transpulmonary pressure is the measure of elastic forces in the lungs. Again the same curve, same graph, but now we will focus on the transpulmonary pressure. So transpulmonary pressure is the pressure difference between the pressure inside the lungs, which is the alveolar pressure, and pressure outside the lung, which is the pleural pressure. Difference between the alveolar and the pleural pressure is the transpulmonary pressure. Now we have seen that at end of each phase of the respiration, that is either at the end of inspiration or at the end of expiration, the alveolar pressure is 0 centimeter of 0 centimeter of water. So the transpulmonary pressure will be equal to the value of pleural pressure at the end of phase of respiration, that is either the inspiration or the expiration. Again I am repeating this point, that at the end of either the inspiration or the expiration, the alveolar pressure is 0 centimeter of water. So the transpulmonary pressure will be equal to the value of the pleural pressure. And significance of transpulmonary pressure is that it is the measure of elastic forces of the lungs or the recoil forces of the lungs. So that's all for today. Thank you for the listening. And if you do not understand any point, you are free to ask questions. Thank you so much.